Silver is more undervalued in 2025 than it has been in history. And on tonight's episode, I'm going to be showing you precisely why holding just a little bit of silver could make you and your family extremely wealthy moving forwards. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike, and on tonight's episode, I'm going to be taking us back to a presentation that I did about 3 years ago on the channel. In fact, my channel had only been around for about 5 or 6 months. And in that episode, I compared the pay of a Roman soldier to the pay of a master mason in medieval England some 1,000 years later. And I showed precisely why gold and silver have and will always be money. Now, in tonight's show, I'm going to be actually updating that presentation, and stick around for the end because I've got some bombshell updates that will show you precisely why silver could make you extremely wealthy moving forward. So let's get to the presentation. Okay, everybody, on to our first slide. And as you can see, we've got the pay of a Roman soldier circa 60 AD. And I'm going to be talking us through this one. Now, if we go back to 60 AD, a Roman soldier was being paid an annual salary of 225 denarii. Now, a dinar was 4 grams of silver. And as you can see, I've done the conversion. It roughly is 8 denarii to around 1 ounce of silver. So he was being paid his entire annual salary in just 28 ounces of silver, which was also, given the gold to silver ratio back then of 9:1, around 3.9 ounces of gold. Now, the annual food cost was 60 denarii, so 7.5 ounces of silver or 0.8 ounces of gold for your annual food budget. Now, remember that for later on. Now, the final part of this slide that I wanted to comment on was the pension of a Roman soldier circa 60 AD. If you made it to your retirement, and I'm guessing that was kind of difficult for a Roman legionnaire, so they had to make the pension quite attractive. Well, it was 2,000 denarii, which equated to 250 ounces of silver or 27.7 ounces of gold, which is almost 10 years' salary. So it was almost 10 years' salary in terms of the pension. And if you could get yourself today 250 ounces of silver or 27.7 ounces of gold, you actually have the equivalent of a Roman legionnaire's pension. Now, you might be saying, Mike, what's that got to do with anything in the modern era? Why would that matter? Well, stick around because by the end of tonight's episode, you might find out that actually it's got a lot to do with what's happening in the world right now, and it is very relevant. So now let's move forward. We're going to jump forward 1,000 years into the future to 1060 AD, and we're going to contrast the salary and expenses of a Roman legionnaire with somebody 1,000 years in the future in medieval England. So let's do it. Okay, now let's go through the annual salaries of different levels of society in medieval England, and we'll begin with the minimum wage worker, which was a porter. This was somebody who would have been a cleaner, so kind of equivalent to minimum wage today, although there would not have been a minimum wage back then because, of course, you could be a slave or a serf, which was 0 wage. But a porter who was working, maybe cleaning out the king's toilet or the poop chute, he would have been paid 4.7 ounces of silver per year, which was equivalent to 0.5 ounces of gold. Now, the annual salary of a master mason, who was somebody who would have been highly skilled and talented, they would have been building the castles, well, they got paid 48.3 ounces of silver per year, which was equivalent to 4.83 ounces of gold. Now, what's really fascinating is 1,000 years later, after our Roman legionnaire, we have this master mason in medieval England. A completely different period of history, wars and famines, even empires have come and gone over those 1,000 years. However, the salaries they're being paid in real money are in the same ballpark. The master mason is being paid 4.83 ounces of gold per year, so less than 1 ounce of gold more than the Roman legionnaire. And they're getting paid 48.3 ounces of silver, which is only 20 ounces of silver more. But the gold to silver ratio has gone up by 1, so naturally, they're getting more silver because they're mining it more efficiently in medieval England than they was back in Rome. So I find that absolutely fascinating. And if you look at the annual food costs, well, they're almost identical. Now just think about that for a second. The annual food costs are almost identical 1,000 years in the future, which really just shows us the power of using gold and silver as money as they should be used. There's been almost 0% inflation in terms of food costs over 1,000 years. Now, looking at this chart here, you can see that over the course of history, the gold to silver ratio has trended upwards from that original ratio of 9:1. Today, it's at 90:1, which is definitely not an accurate representation of how much silver is coming out of the ground comparable to gold. And that's led to a huge opportunity in silver, but we'll come back to that one later in the presentation. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 3-4-5 strategy, which was something that I added to the previous presentation as a strategy for people to get themselves ready for harder times. Now, this was really just an emergency strategy for people who were just getting started and they wanted to make sure they had enough money, enough gold and silver to see them through some harder times. And it's a very simple strategy. It requires you to save 3 months of living expenses in cash. Why? Well, going into a hyperinflation or a period of very high inflation, particularly when we might have all kinds of crises. We've seen wars since 2022. This was before the Ukraine war. It was before all of the crazy inflation, the commodity inflation. So I said 3 months of living expenses in cash will ensure that no matter what happens, you can pay for what you need. And of course, the only reason you have cash is because, let's face it, anything could happen. We could have cash machines go dark. That's happened many times over the past 3 years. We've had so many incidences in different countries across the West where banks have had cyber attacks and people have not been able to access their accounts. Now, in the UK, even when there isn't a cyber attack, you can't access your account. If you try and take out more than a few £100s in the UK, they'll block it and they'll block your account and they might even call you in for an interrogation. What you're going to spend it on, what you're doing with the money. That's what it's like in the UK. That's how bad it is. Now, if they don't like you or they just don't like the answers that you give them, they could block you out of your account. So you always want to have some living expenses, some cash on hand to ensure that if that ever happens to you, you remain liquid. And I said 3 months living expenses is a good start. Now, on top of 3 months living expenses in cash, we also discussed in the 3-4-5 strategy 4 months living expenses or 4 months salary in silver and 5 months living expenses or 5 months salary in gold. And that was the 3-4-5 strategy. And like I said, this was just a starting point or a short-term goal for people who are new to metals, new to saving, and they want to get themselves up and running. And this would give them a really good no counterparty foundation of savings to begin with. So now let's have a look at how the 3-4-5 strategy was working when I first introduced the concept 3 years ago in 2022, and I gave an example as to how this portfolio would look using the average UK salary. So back in 2022, the average UK salary was a humble £33,000 per year. And at the time, using the gold price back then, that equated to 22.6 ounces of gold. Now, 3 months living expenses based off of that average salary was £4,500. 4 months living expenses was £6,000, which equated to 285 ounces of silver, because remember, the 4 months living expenses go straight into silver, and the 5 months living expenses was £7,500, and that equated to 6 ounces of gold, which was the foundation of the strategy. So that was the 3-4-5 strategy back in 2022, and its total cost was £18,000. And for that, you came away with 3 months living expenses, which in a crisis, you certainly could have stretched out to 6 months, maybe even 9 months. Then you had 285 ounces of silver, which is a lot and would certainly have lasted you another year or so. And then you had 6 ounces in gold. And bearing in mind, in a crisis, the value of gold and silver and the desirability of it would have gone up substantially because, of course, people would be rushing to real assets. So now let's update this strategy for 2025 using the current UK average salary and the current gold price and silver price to find out if the strategy did its job of protecting your wealth and also what the true rate of inflation has been when valued in gold and silver. Okay, my friends, here we are on the updated chart. And as you can see, I've updated the UK average salary and all of the sums on the chart. So let's start at the very top. The average UK salary has jumped up from £33,000 per year to £37,500 per year. I bet you're all excited about that, but wait just a second. Don't get too excited, because what that actually means in real terms is not good. Because back in 2022, the salary of £33,000 bought you 22.6 ounces of gold. Today, it only buys you 15 ounces of gold, which means you have lost 33% of your salary despite it going up nominally in just 3 years. If you value things in gold, it will tell you the truth. Now, 4 months living expenses or 4 months salary, well, 6,000, now it's at 8,000. So you can see the 3-4-5 strategy is far more expensive today to complete than it was back in 2022. And here's the worst part. you're paying more and you're getting less. So 4 months living expenses is now £8,000. But instead of 285 ounces of silver, today it only gets you 238 ounces of silver. A drastic loss in real purchasing power. 5 months living expenses or 5 months salary in gold. Well, now that's going to take £10,000 to achieve, and you're only going to get 4.1 ounces of gold instead of 6 ounces of gold. And the total cost of the 345 strategy has gone up from 18,000 to 24,000, but it's buying you around 30% less in terms of silver and gold, meaning my strategy worked. It was very successful over the past 3 years. If you had have employed this strategy, you would have protected a substantial amount of your purchasing power. And of course, the more you put into the silver and the gold, the more you would have protected yourself from the inflation. Now, when I first did this, I elected to put gold as the foundation of this wealth pyramid, you could say. And some people questioned that. They said, why not silver? Well, I think it's proven itself again in that gold was the best hedge against the inflation. Silver has lost 16.5%, but gold 31.5%, meaning gold has gone up more than silver. It's been a better protector of wealth, and that's what gold's meant to do. Silver is more speculative. At times, it can greatly increase your wealth, and that's kind of where we're going to go to now. So we're going to move on and start discussing America and the minimum wage over there. And I've got some really interesting observances that cycle us all the way back to 60 AD. Let's get to it. Okay, my friends, here we are over in the USA, and you can see the minimum wage in the USA is unbelievably still only $7.5 per hour, which is shocking, actually. It's $15,080 per year. Now, of course, some people are paid more than that, but the actual minimum wage is only $15,000 per year. Now, whilst that might not seem like very much, just remember our previous slides, because this is absolutely fascinating to me. Because if you remember, the Roman legionnaire was being paid for his annual salary 3.9 ounces of gold. That was in 60 AD. 1,000 years later, in 1060 AD, the master mason was being paid almost the same. It was 4.8 ounces of gold. And then fast forward another 1,000 years to present day, and the minimum wage is paying you around 4.9 ounces of gold. Now, that is almost the exact same salary in gold as a master mason 1,000 years in the past. And it's just a little bit more than the Roman legionnaire was being paid 1,000 years before that. This is not a coincidence. This is showing us that gold has consistently retained its value for 2,000 years. And we're getting to the point where gold's going to be revalued. And I think what we're seeing here in this presentation is a very good representation as to where that valuation is going to go to. It's going to be that 4.9 ounces of gold will once again be enough to live off comfortably for the year. And I think it's fair to say that gold will have to be revalued, and I'm talking in today's money, in today's money's purchasing power, at around $25,000 to $30,000 per ounce. Now, when that financial reset happens and they have to reset versus gold, if the gold price goes up to around $25,000 per ounce or equivalent, because of course they could create a new currency, but the purchasing power around $25,000 per ounce, that would mean that 4.9 ounces of gold is no longer equivalent to around $15,000. It would now be equivalent to the purchasing power in today's money of $122,500, which now, having been through the presentation, you can see that historically is right about where it should be. That's what a master mason was being paid. So 4.9 ounces equivalent to around 120,000. Yeah, I think that's about right. So now let's move on, because this one's a very fascinating slide. You can see we've also got the annual salary for a manager. That's around $90,000 per year. And I'm going to comment on silver at the end, but just look at the numbers. 2,547 ounces of silver. That's actually over half what a nobleman was being paid in medieval England. And yet it's only 29.7 ounces of gold. Of course, this is because of the crazy gold to silver ratio. Then we've got an annual salary for a CEO of a mid-sized firm, around $1.15 million, which is a staggering 32,550 ounces of silver and 380 ounces of gold. That's a huge sum in terms of real money. But now let's address the elephant in the room, which is silver, because I said at the start of tonight's presentation, I'm going to take you through a slideshow, and I'm going to tell you at the end why I think silver is the most undervalued metal in the world right now. And I think it's going to make a lot of people very wealthy, even if they just have a modest amount. Well, hopefully by now you're seeing why that is. Clearly, gold has held its purchasing power for over 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, you could live off around 4 to 5 ounces of gold very comfortably. Today, you wouldn't live quite so comfortably because it's a minimum wage salary. However, you could still survive, and that's changing rapidly. And I think it's going to correct itself. But look at silver. This is where things get really strange because whilst a salary paid in gold has not changed that much over 2,000 years, a salary paid in silver is far, far higher today than it was 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. So let's contrast what you would get just on minimum wage today in terms of silver ounces for the minimum wage salary, even though the gold you would get is kind of the same. Well, a Roman centurion was only getting 28 ounces of silver per year. Well, our Roman soldier was only getting paid 28 ounces of silver per year for a salary that is actually less comparatively speaking. You get 420 ounces of silver on minimum wage. And that's because of the crazy gold to silver ratio, which is the amount of silver you can get for 1 ounce of gold. It was 9 to 1 in 60 AD. It was 10 to 1 in 1060 AD. And today it's actually 90 to 1. It's gone up a little bit since I made this slide. It's 90 to 1. And right now the gold price is really just entering a new paradigm. It's breaking out. It used to be it went up $100 per year. Now it's going up $100 every single week. That's because we're getting to the end of this paradigm and we're going back to real money. That's why China's amassed 30, 40,000 tons. That's why Russia's amassing 10, 15,000 tons. That's why Europe's now going back to gold. And that's why America's scrambling to try and trap people in the dollar because they understand that the whole system's going to get reset in the very near future. And at that point, all of the debt in the system and all of the crazy asset prices are then going to have to be reinterpreted through gold. And that means a far higher gold and silver price. And I say silver as well because silver is going to be a part of it. It's not going to be remonetized as gold is. And we know that because the central banks are buying up gold at record levels. So we know it's gold that's going to be the backing of the new monetary system. And that makes sense. That's why it's at the base of my strategy. And I've got a more comprehensive strategy for members of my Patreon and Substack community where I go into this in much greater detail. So please do check that out to support me and the content and yourself. But in my basic strategy of a 3-4-5 strategy that I shared in this presentation, gold's at the bottom because that is going to be the base of the next monetary system. So it should also be the base of your monetary system, of your savings vehicle, because you should treat yourself like a central bank, become your own central bank. However, silver is an extremely important industrial metal. It comes out of the ground at around 15 to 20 ounces to 1 ounce of gold. So that historic gold to silver ratio, I think, will be reasserted in a big way. Now, just think about that for a second. If gold gets revalued to around $25,000, $30,000 per ounce, what do you think is going to happen to silver when it's such a vital metal for industry? And also, 50% of all silver mined is used up in industry. It's irretrievable unless the prices go much higher. Well, I think it's going to shoot up in price as well. I think there's going to be resource wars in the future. And silver is such a strategically important commodity. And it has a monetary aspect too for people like you and I, the everyday person who wants to protect their wealth, that it's going to have to go up much higher from here. And I think we're going to see that gold to silver ratio come back down to maybe around 30 to 1 or 20 to 1. And when that happens, what we're going to see is people who have saved their wealth in silver suddenly become far richer because of it. And they'll be able to then transfer out into gold if they want, or simply hold on to the silver and use it in transactions, trade and barter, trade it for whatever currency they need to trade it into at that point. But it will buy them a lot more stuff. And I think looking back historically and seeing these long trends, these long arcs of history that most people are completely unaware of is very instructive because we've all been conditioned to see things through the fiat lens, the fiat paradigm, because that's what we was brought up in. But since I started the channel, I've been warning you about the changes that are happening right now. And even in the short space of time between me actually doing the first presentation and today when I revised it, you can see that the nominal salary is going up, but your purchasing power is being destroyed. You're getting far less gold and silver for your money. And that's because vis-a-vis gold and silver, everything is collapsing. The stock market, the housing market, and especially the fiat currencies. So if you do not get yourself positioned for the next system now, unfortunately, what you saw take place over the last 3 years is going to only speed up. So I would say now is the time to get yourself positioned and ready. And hopefully, in the next system, you will be greatly rewarded for it. History certainly suggests that is where it's going. And everything that we're seeing right now points to a reset coming in the very near future. Okay, everybody. And with that, we're going to end tonight's show. So please let me know in the comment section what you think of silver. Do you prefer it to gold? And also, where do you think the gold to silver ratio is going to go in the financial reset? Similarly, what's your own personal ratio in terms of saving in gold and silver? Is it 50-50? Is it more weighted towards silver or gold? Let me know in the comment section and I'll get back to as many of you as I can. Also, if you'd like to check out more of my work, I do have a Patreon and a Substack where I deliver audio newsletters, articles. There's lots going on over there. There's also a fantastic community, so please check that out to support me and the show. And also support yourself because I give people advice that helps them get ready for harder times. In closing, I hope you're all well and healthy. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all in the next video.